It all started on a Wednesday morning. I was sipping coffee at the kitchen table when I heard strange engines outside. At first, I assumed someone was having work done on their driveway, but then the noise grew louder and closer. When I opened my front door, I saw the crew, a fleet of trucks, workers in orange safety vests, and a big sign that said, "Property of Willow Creek Estates, HOA, Reserved Parking Construction." For a moment, I just stood there in stunned silence. This was my property line, and my deed explicitly showed that I owned the land up to the old oak tree near the curb. Yet these workers were already roping off an entire rectangular area, measuring spaces and preparing to pave. "Excuse me," I said, raising my voice. "What do you think you're doing?" One of the workers, a tall man with a short beard, stopped and flipped through some papers. "I'm sorry, sir. I'm just following orders from the HOA. They said this land was approved for parking spaces. They claim it's part of the common area." "Common area?" I repeated, feeling my pulse spike. I pointed at my mailbox, which stood well beyond where they were starting to dig. "That mailbox has been here for 15 years, ever since I moved in. This is private property." The worker shrugged helplessly. "Look, I'm just doing my job." I asked to speak to whoever was in charge, and that's when I saw her. Karen Winters, president of the Willow Creek Estates HOA. She had her usual bright red blazer on, her hair styled in a perfect bob and a clipboard in hand. Karen was known for her strict interpretations of HOA bylaws and her relentless pursuit of community improvements, often ignoring people's actual rights in the process. "Morning," Karen said with a tight smile, flipping through her notes. "We're building something beneficial for the entire neighborhood. Please step aside and let the crew continue." I could feel my hands shaking, but I kept my voice as steady as I could. "Karen, you can't just repurpose my land for a parking project. Where is your permit? Where's the paperwork showing I gave you permission?" Karen gave a dismissive wave. "The board voted unanimously. It's a done deal. If you look at the old layout, this area was designated as community buffer. We're just reclassifying it. Now, unless you have official proof to the contrary, I suggest you let us do our work." She turned away, expecting me to back down, but I'd spent too many years paying off this mortgage to let my property vanish like that. The very next morning, the sound of bulldozers and asphalt mixers tore through the neighborhood. Workers had already laid the foundation for the parking lot. 36 spaces, they said, to accommodate visitors and handle overflow traffic for the community. According to rumor, Karen claimed it would raise everyone's property values and improve neighborhood functionality. I couldn't focus on anything else. My property taxes, my deed, the boundary lines, I knew they all confirmed that space is mine. But the HOA newsletter or meeting minutes had never once mentioned a parking lot so large that it crept well into my yard. Desperate for clarity, I dug out every piece of paperwork I had from the day I purchased the home. I found the official deed, property surveys, mortgage documents. The original survey clearly showed that the boundary extended from the sidewalk to the old oak tree. The area the workers were paving was indeed on my land, not the HOA's. Yet Karen kept insisting that they were using common area. And I noticed something. The official HOA map that Karen had posted online was outdated. Maybe from decades ago. It wasn't even the right version from the year I bought my house. I decided I needed professional help. My late father had a longtime friend, Mr. Marshall, who had served as our family attorney for years. He was over 80 now, but still sharp as a tack. If anyone could help me figure out these conflicting maps and archaic bylaws, it was him. That afternoon, I drove to Mr. Marshall's small law office on Maple Street. Even though he'd mostly retired, he still kept a desk there. And sure enough, when I walked in, I found him bent over a stack of thick law books. "Mr. Marshall," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice, "I'm in serious trouble with my HOA. They're building a parking lot on my land, but claim they have the right to do so. I have my deed, but they have some sort of old document that says otherwise." Mr. Marshall adjusted his reading glasses and motioned for me to sit. "You'd be surprised how often I hear about HOA disputes, but a parking lot on private land? That's quite bold. Let's see what you have." I handed him all my documents, the property deed, the mortgage agreement, the survey. He examined them with surprising speed for someone his age. "This is valid," he said, tapping the official boundary map with a bony finger. "You have clear ownership. The question is whether the HOA's records accurately match these boundaries or if they change them illegally. They keep mentioning an older map that supposedly designates my property as common area," I told him, sighing. "But I'm certain that's outdated." Mr. Marshall gave me a sympathetic nod. "Outdated or not, they can't override your official deed without a proper legal procedure, like an eminent domain action or a negotiated purchase agreement. They have neither. It sounds like they're counting on intimidation and confusion to get their way." We discussed next steps. He said we'd send a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA, demanding they stop construction immediately. If they refused, we'd pursue an injunction in court. I felt a flicker of hope for the first time that week. "Thank you," I said, rising from my chair. "But I'm worried they've already poured the foundation for these parking spots. They're not slowing down." Mr. Marshall gave me a reassuring look. "Keep documenting everything. Photos, videos, statements from the workers. We'll build a case. And don't worry, I'm old, but I still know my way around a courtroom." When I drove back into Willow Creek Estates, I saw something that made my stomach turn. There were already 12 painted spots along the edge of what used to be my grassy yard, complete with bright yellow lines. A sign stood in the middle reading, "Reserved parking, HOA members only." An older neighbor who I'd known for years approached me cautiously. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "Karen told us you agreed to this. She said you volunteered your land to help with the parking shortage." I stood there speechless for a moment. "What? That's a complete lie. I never said anything like that. I'm doing everything I can to stop this project." The neighbor's eyes widened. "I don't understand why Karen would tell us that then. She made it sound like you were a hero doing the community a favor." My blood was boiling at Karen's manipulation. I hurried inside my house. Sure enough, my mailbox was stuffed with newsletters praising the new parking expansion, calling it a gift from a generous resident. One letter even had my name attached, as if I'd endorsed the entire thing. I grabbed a handful of these false pamphlets and marched down the sidewalk to find Karen. It didn't take long. She was supervising more workers as they installed concrete blocks for the far corners of the lot. "Karen!" I called, raising the newsletters. "You're lying to everyone. These claim I graciously donated my land. That's not what happened." She turned to me with a slow, calculated smile. "Why make a fuss, dear? Everyone appreciates your contribution. Don't ruin it by nitpicking about property lines." "Property lines? This is trespassing, not nitpicking," I nearly shouted. "And we both know I never agreed to any of this." Her eyes narrowed. "Have you considered a compromise? Maybe we can discuss some form of compensation. Let's say we call it a friendly arrangement. You could make a little money out of this." "Little money?" I repeated. "You think I'm going to sell you my property for peanuts just so you can pour more asphalt?" Karen's tone turned icy. "Be reasonable. If you try to fight this, you'll be going up against the entire HOA board. We have funds for legal fees, and we have connections with the county officials. It could become very messy for you." I stared at her, realizing she was threatening me. "We'll see about that," I replied, forcing my voice not to shake, "because I'm not backing down." She shrugged. "Suit yourself. The board meeting is tomorrow night. If you come to your senses by then, maybe we can settle on a nice payment and call it even." The following day, I met Mr. Marshall again. We'd put together a cease and desist letter, which we delivered to the HOA office by hand. The letter stated clearly that the land they were paving did not belong to the HOA, that they had no right to build on it, and that they had to stop work immediately or face legal consequences. That evening, I attended the HOA board meeting, mostly to see how they'd react to our letter. The room was full, with neighbors who seemed excited about the extra parking. Karen sat at the head of the table, flanked by board members who wore polite smiles that vanished the moment they saw me. "Next on the agenda is the new parking initiative," Karen announced, ignoring the tension in the air. "We're on track to finish construction next week. It's going to be a huge improvement for Willow Creek Estates." I raised my hand to speak, but Karen pretended not to see me. Finally, the secretary gave a small cough. Karen, I believe Mr. Jones wants to make a statement regarding the property. Karen sighed. Fine, let him speak. I stood up, feeling my neighbor's eyes on me. Some seemed confused, some sympathetic, and others just curious. I served the board with a cease and desist letter earlier today. The so-called parking area is on my private property. You do not have permission to build there, and I'm prepared to take legal action if you don't stop. A wave of murmurs spread through the crowd. Karen looked calm, but a red flush crept up her neck. Mr. Jones, your concerns have been noted. However, the board believes we have sufficient grounds and older documents confirming it's actually part of the community buffer zone. We intend to move forward. Then you'll be receiving an injunction, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. Because your older documents are not valid, my official deed and updated surveys say otherwise. Karen clicked her pen. We'll let our lawyers handle that. This meeting is adjourned. She banged her gavel and walked out, leaving the room buzzing with worried chatter. A few neighbors approached me, apologizing for not realizing the property was really mine. Others looked doubtful, probably afraid to speak out against Karen. Late that night, I sifted through the darkest corners of my attic, searching for anything that might help me prove beyond a doubt that the HOA had zero claims to my land. Then I spotted an old wooden trunk labeled with my grandfather's initials. Inside were a bunch of dusty documents and photos from decades ago. Among them, I found some interesting records of Willow Creek Estates back when the area was first developed. It was a cluster of farmland back then. My grandparents had owned a big chunk of it before the city was built up. My eyes widened as I came across a worn-out contract dated over 50 years ago. It was an agreement between my grandfather and a local development company, specifying certain parcels of land that the new housing association could use as community grounds. But there was a detailed map attached showing exactly which portions were to remain under my grandfather's private ownership. Squinting at the lines, I recognized the precise shape of my property, and sure enough, it included the section where those parking spaces were now being built. This was a gold mine, an original, legally binding document proving my family had always retained ownership. If the HOA tried to claim they had some older right to it, they were simply wrong. I carefully placed the documents in a sturdy folder. Mr. Marshall would want to see these immediately. Part of me wanted to drive straight to his office that second, but it was nearly midnight. Instead, I texted him a photo of the map. 5 minutes later, he called me. Even half asleep, he sounded excited. This is a big deal, he said. I'll compare it with modern records first thing in the morning. If these older contracts show your family never relinquished that piece of land to the association, then the HOA has no argument left. They can't override private property rights. I exhaled with relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had a winning hand. Sure enough, the next day, I emailed digital copies of the old contracts and maps to the HOA's official address, CCing Karen and the rest of the board. I made it clear that continuing construction was trespassing and a violation of historical agreements. That evening, the construction was, miraculously, paused. The heavy machinery sat idle, but my victory was short-lived. Around sunset, my doorbell rang. Karen stood there, looking tense. "Let's talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She perched on the couch, crossing her legs. "The city council is desperate for more parking," she said. "They're willing to pay a significant sum if we finalize the deal." I laughed. "But the HOA doesn't own the land. You can't sell what isn't yours." Her expression tightened. "That can change. Sign over the rights and you'll get a generous payout." I leaned forward. "You want me to let you profit off my land?" Karen kept her voice even. "You'll make out nicely, much more than what it's worth. And if I say no?" Her eyes darkened. "We have connections. We can make your life complicated." That was it, the direct threat. My jaw tightened. "Get out of my house, Karen. I'm not selling." She stared at me for a long moment before standing. "Think it over. This is your last chance before we escalate." I didn't bother walking her to the door. 2 days later, I got an unexpected call from a man named Michael Newton, the city's urban development director. He sounded anxious on the phone. "I'm sure you've heard the rumors," he began. "The city is short on downtown parking, and we see Willow Creek Estates as a potential solution. That's the lot your HOA is building on, correct? I cleared my throat. It's my land, not the HOA's. Ah, he said, sounding both surprised and relieved. If that's the case, perhaps we should speak directly. The city might be willing to negotiate with you for an easement or even a full purchase, provided everything is legal and above board. We scheduled a meeting at the local coffee shop. Mr. Marshall joined me, bringing copies of the old contracts, my deed, and a detailed modern survey. We spread the papers on the table. Michael's eyes lit up as he realized how perfectly my property fit the city's plan to expand parking near the main avenue. The city council has funds allocated for this project, he said. We were under the impression it belonged to the HOA, but this changes everything. Mr. Marshall nodded. It definitely does. We've confirmed that the property is in Mr. Jones's name, and the HOA's claims are baseless. Michael glanced at me hesitantly. Well, if you're open to selling or leasing it, we'd offer a substantial amount, certainly more than the standard real estate value, given our urgent need. I couldn't help but let a small grin form. For weeks, Karen and the HOA had bullied me, twisting facts and threatening me with lawsuits. Now the city was acknowledging I was the rightful owner. I thanked Michael for the information, letting him know I'd consider my options. Just keep in mind, he said, lowering his voice, we want to do this properly. The city has no interest in legal battles. If the HOA tries to claim they own the land, we won't proceed with them. We'll only negotiate directly with you. By that weekend, word had spread through Willow Creek Estates that the city had stepped in, and that I held the real power. Neighbors who previously avoided me now stopped by to ask for updates. Some apologized for believing Karen. Others admitted she'd threatened them into supporting her. Then came the night of the special meeting. The HOA board convened to discuss the status of the parking project. The room was packed, standing room only. Karen sat at the head of the table, doing her best to maintain an air of control, but I could see the stress in her eyes. First order of business, Karen said tightly. We have discovered a conflict regarding the land. The board is assessing solutions. I stood up. You mean you're assessing my land, which you illegally developed, and now the city only wants to work with me, not the HOA. She shot me a glare, but tried to keep her voice neutral. Please wait until we open the floor for comments. But Mr. Marshall interrupted. Madam President, my client has official documents proving his sole ownership. We delivered them to your office days ago. He pulled out the copies of my deed and the vintage contract from my grandfather's time. There's no gray area. You trespassed. A low hum of concern spread across the audience. People began whispering to each other, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The tension was so thick I felt my heart pounding. Karen's face reddened. We acted on the best information available to us at the time. The board was told this was common area. Now that we see contradictory documents, we'll reevaluate. A neighbor I recognized, Mrs. Carter, stood up. Evaluate. You've already built half the parking lot on someone else's land. Are you going to pay for ripping it up and restoring his yard? Or are you going to pay him for the land? Added another voice. Karen banged her gavel. Please let us maintain order. Then the HOA treasurer spoke up, voice trembling. Karen, we can't afford a large settlement or a legal battle. Our reserves are limited. We've spent a lot on that asphalt already. A hush fell as the realization sank in. If I sued, the HOA would be on the hook for massive damages, and if the city was now willing to pay me, the HOA would see none of that money. Karen tried to salvage her position with a fake smile. We can still work out a reasonable deal, right? Something that benefits the entire community? I shook my head. You tried to force me. You threatened me. And then you lied to my neighbors about me donating land. Why would I partner with you now? She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The board members stared at her, and the neighbors did too. Finally, the secretary sighed. I make a motion to remove Karen Winters as HOA president, effective immediately. A gasp went through the room. Karen's eyes went wide. You can't do that. Yes, we can, said the treasurer, standing up, because you misled us, and now we're exposed to a potential lawsuit. It's time for you to step down. The motion was quickly seconded by multiple board members. They voted on it right then, and Karen lost her position in a matter of minutes. She stood up, tears of anger in her eyes, and stormed out of the room without another word. The entire place was silent. Then someone started clapping, and soon the whole room erupted in applause. It was a dramatic fall for the once untouchable HOA president who had run things with an iron fist. I could feel a wave of relief washing over me. Karen was gone. The intimidation and lies would stop. Now it was just a matter of finalizing the paperwork so I could reclaim my property, or possibly strike a fair deal with the city on my terms.